Often when I come to the universities, I talk about China. Other times I go and I talk about Cialis. And today we're going to do both. So it's going to be an interesting mix. If I start mixing the two into different stories, we know we've got a problem. But hopefully we can stay on topic. I also want to use this as an opportunity to share a little bit about my career, what's worked, what doesn't work, and what I've chosen to interweave into the story are actually two times when I failed. So I'm going to talk about a time in China where I really screwed things up. And then I also want to talk about a time on Cialis, the day I thought I was going to be fired. And I thought that would help you a little bit, because I know often when you have speakers come, we talk about what we do well, but everybody makes mistakes, and it's important that you understand those as well. So I thought we'd spend a little time on that as well. At Lilly, generally when people talk about careers at Lilly, they tend to define them by functions. Either I'm a marketer, I'm a salesperson, or I've got a general manager. And through my career, what I've started to learn, and you don't know this when you start, you kind of figure it out as you go along, and the older you get, the more reflective you get, I think. But what I've learned is I kind of play more of the role at Lilly of an entrepreneur. Out of my 13 jobs, 9 of them, I was the first person to do it. And I don't think that's a coincidence, even though it's happening early in my career, and I don't think I could communicate what I like to do. Things just kind of always worked out that way. And I think then over time I started to realize that's really what I enjoy doing. During that time I've had the pleasure of launching 3 brands, 2 in the U.S. and then Cialis globally. I was able to start a generic company inside Lilly, and then I started our Chinese affiliate. So that was without a doubt the most exciting experience of my life, building a business in a incredibly dynamic market like China. And then on top of that, I've had the opportunity, as you heard in the information, of helping Lilly kind of step into this world of consumer marketing, which is certainly foreign to us. So we're going to kind of touch on all that stuff as we go along. I thought I'd start with China, then move to Cialis. Give you a little bit of a sense for what was going on. In 1995, Lilly was just re-entering China. China was actually Lilly's second affiliate outside the United States in 1919. Kind of weird, but it was. And but with World War II and everything else, we had left. And when we went back in, we actually went back in the mid-'80s, late 80s, and they made the strategic mistake of putting the office in the Beijing Hotel. And any of you that have been to Beijing know that the Beijing Hotel is right across from Tiananmen Square. And so I think what happened was, because they were sitting there and they saw that the people in charge decided to shut down, and so we didn't come back until 1995. That put us about 10 years behind most of the other major pharmaceutical companies. So we were certainly playing catch up, and I still think today, if the office had been in Shanghai in the 80s, we may have made a different decision. But given where it was and everything, it is what it is. So as we get into this marketplace, I was stepping in. We had some people on the ground, but literally we were working out of 3 hotel rooms, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing, one in Guangzhou. And our job was to, this was in 1995, our job was by the year 2000 to sell $100 million. In the Chinese market. Now, they didn't tell me that when I accepted the job. I saw that in the business plan when I got to China, but that was probably my first mistake, right? I should have asked to see what the long-range plan was before I accepted the job. But these were the 3 things I wanted to focus. There's a lot of external factors going on in China, and you can all read about that, intellectual property, all those other things. But there were 3 critical internal things we needed to work through. First off, how do we get a critical mass of local talent? Secondly, how do we build the capabilities from a demand creation standpoint in this marketplace? And then thirdly, how do we build the right type of relationships with the type of customers? So I'm going to touch on those. On a talent and talent development standpoint, without a doubt, the biggest challenge in this marketplace. We had 50 people when I got there, had 42% turnover. So you weren't really developing any talent except for talent for other people at that time. And this was the biggest challenge because there were so many opportunities for people that, if something didn't work out in a year, they just went to another organization. And there were just so many job opportunities. It's that way today in the marketplace. The industry average turnover today in China is around 25 to 30%. So it's a very difficult marketplace to create any kind of long-term vision and talent development for yourself, because everyone's always stealing and changing talent. Our challenge was, here we are new, and people didn't know anything about us, and we really had no corporate culture. So when I got there, out of the 50 people, we had a series of leaders who were China experts, who had worked for 2 or 3 pharmaceutical companies in China, and we'd hired them to help us build this operation. And given you're starting new, that's probably a good thing to do. The challenge is they have a different agenda, and I don't speak Chinese. So I had these 3 leaders, and they got their agenda. They clearly had a career vision around building their own personal brand in China rather than the Lilly brand. So within 60 days, we fired all 3 of them. And we said, you know what, we're going to go this differently. And we took 3 local employees and promoted them into those jobs. Now, those 3 local employees weren't ready for those jobs. And we knew that. We knew that was a longer path. But somehow we needed to build our strategy, our plan, our culture, rather than the culture of each individual who was in charge. One of the challenges at this time in China was that the leader was often more important than the company. And so people were more aligned with the leader. So, for example, I was the president of Lilly, but the president of Glaxo quit and became the president of Pfizer. Well, his whole management staff left with him and moved to Pfizer, and he fired all the people at Pfizer's management staff, and so they just all shifted over because people were aligned to those leaders who had a long-term stake in that, not to any of the companies. So that was a big challenge for us. So we promoted these 3 folks, and we said, this will be great. We'll show commitment to our employees. They'll show that we're investing in them rather than folks outside of here, and this will work really well. Well, the first one we promoted was in Beijing. She was a district manager, and there were 2 other district managers there. They both quit the next day because she won and they lost, right? So then we promoted out of our sales reps in Beijing, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 of them. We promoted 2 of them to be district managers, 71% turnover within 30 days. Because, again, those people, those 2 won, and the others viewed themselves as having lost. So it was like, geez, here we come. This is really a tricky thing, isn't it? But what we found was that, and when you reflected on it, what you saw was that we as an organization had not, what I used to tell my team is, listen, we've made no deposits in the credibility bank. These folks have no reason to believe in us and to believe that if they stay with us and work with us, that future may look different and better. So why not if somebody's calling on the phone, there's all these job opportunities. So we had to change our philosophy and say, how do we create a culture that everybody feels like there's a chance here, rather than you win, I lose? And then how do we help people see where we're going and why there's opportunities and why it makes more sense to stay here? So we needed to start investing in the people. Now that was controversial because at 42% turnover, why would you spend any money investing in anybody? Right? And my answer was, well, at 42% turnover, I better do something, right? Because if you keep having that turnover, there's no way you can build that foundation to build a company that's going to be $100 million because you're always doing this the whole time. So we went in action mode and actually stole an idea from Motorola called, they had Motorola University. And we went in action mode to build Lilly University, where we were committed to the training and development of our people. And we took 10 people and put them in MBA schools around the world or in China, depending on their needs. We set up a training program so every employee from the receptionist on up had at least 2 weeks of training every year. And what they saw then was, hey, this company is investing in me. I take that with me, and I'm going to stay here even if I don't get that job next because I know they're committed to me and investing in me. That was a huge culture change. But within 3 years, our turnover was down to 5%. So that then gave us the foundation that we could start to develop and train people. Because Lilly has a culture, and one thing about Lilly is that whether you're in the Shanghai office or the Indianapolis office or the Sao Paulo office, you know you're at Lilly. We try to have a global culture, obviously adapting to the local situation. And that's what we wanted to create in China. That was really important to us, that we do things the way we want to do it and make sure our brand is the same in that situation. And so if you had all that turnover and you're always hiring local expertise, that wasn't going to happen. So this became a big challenge for us, but it ended up being probably our most important success. How do we do that and how do we train it? We had a promotion. What are we going to do? Well, every single person who might believe that they're up for that promotion or they're hurt, we're going to talk to before we ever do the promotion. So it took a lot of effort, a lot of time, but it allowed us to build that foundation and catch up because our competitors were still at 25% turnover. And so it allowed us to build a different kind of paradigm. And all of a sudden, what was happening is here's this little company. We sold $2 million in 1995. We were 77th of the international companies. And all of a sudden, we had people coming to us from the big companies wanting to work at Lilly. And that allowed us then to pick which talent we wanted and build our business. That made a big change in how we did things. And all of a sudden there was kind of a buzz that, hey, this is the kind of company you want to work for. This is the kind of company that does things. Look at, they've taken these locals and promoted them. Now that was a positive, right? Because people were seeing opportunity. They've taken these local folks and sent them to the London School of Business. They've got 10 people in the Shanghai MBA school. So all of a sudden they could see that we were willing to make that commitment in them long term. But it was really hard, and it took a long time for us to get out of this culture of that person won, we lost, or I lost. But once you get out of that, it became very, very powerful. The next piece of this that was a challenge is transfer of power. Because what had happened then, I'm now there a couple of years, and I had to avoid the same problem that you saw when the guys went to GSK to Pfizer. What happens when I leave? Because is this Lily or is this Rob that they're lying to? So my last year and a half, I actually separated myself from all these decisions, and we spread them all out so that allegiance could spread out across the company, and we put everything under the context of Lily. We started having my boss in Singapore come up for some of the events, so they saw him as the person who was bringing this to them rather than me. Because again, one of my big worries is what I was building was going to fall apart as soon as I left. Now, we succeeded in managing that. Everything went fine when I left. I will tell you, when my successor left 3 years later, we imploded. And companies in China go through some of these implosions, and the goal is to try to limit the number of implosions you have. So we had 5-7% turnover rate with an industry average of 25. 2 years ago, we were at 38. And we basically, all the people we'd invested with all walked away. So it's a continual challenge on how you do this. When we go into developing markets, this is a challenge everywhere we go. In Eastern Europe, we saw the same thing. As your sales grow and as your opportunities grow for your business, can your talent grow at the same rate to keep up with it? And that's a big challenge because obviously we can take somebody to run a $2 million business, and it may not be the same person you're willing to run a $100 million business, even if they're growing and developing. So how do you do that so that you're developing them at a pace? And can you? Or is it inevitable that you will end up losing some of those folks and have to go out and acquire somebody else? That's the challenge you run into in these marketplaces, and one I think we did a reasonably good job of succeeding. But even then, we ultimately imploded. Now, I wanted to talk about my big South China mistake, and this is kind of a funny story. My first 6 months there, I did a very American thing. I said, let's take our top sales reps from around China and bring them in and talk to them about what's working, what do they need. So we brought them in, and we do this in the U.S., and we brought them in, and they broke into little groups, and then we said, listen, you spend the next hour coming up with a list of things that are important for you and that we should do differently to help us grow our business. So they all did that, and then they were going to come back and present it to me. So I come in there, present it to me, and they were, 5 groups. And every group, their number one thing they said was, I want Rob to come to my hospital. And I saw the first one, I said, that's okay. And the second one, so by the third one, I'm kind of mad. Because I'm thinking, well, that's their job. These are the sales reps. They need to go out and talk to these hospitals. That's not my job. And so I gave them a bit of a lecture. I said, you need to do your thing. I need to do my thing. I'm happy to help you, but you need to own that business. So they went off, and about 9 months later, I was in Guangzhou. And we were horrid in Guangzhou. Our turnover was still high, and I was meeting with the district manager, and our turnover was like 40%. And she said, well, I was saying, why is our turnover so high? And every time in Guangzhou we had turnover, our sales went to 0. So we're in a hospital, and we sell something, we have turnover, it goes to 0, we get somebody else in, it takes 6 months, we just get back to where we were. So 40% turnover, you can imagine, we weren't making any progress. And Glaxo was our big competitor there, and they sold, 20 times what we sold. And she said, well, Glaxo's turnover is 71%. And I said, hold on a second. Relationship-based marketplace, whenever our relationships leave, their sales go to 0. Why? Why don't theirs? Well, their CEO knows the president of the hospital. And so I said, I got it now. So what I had not realized is, some of these cultures, you have to, different levels of relationships, and there's no way a sales rep in China could have continued access or relationship with that hospital president. So I was taking a U.S. mentality to this where, you could do that in the U.S. You're a good sales rep, you build that network in the hospital, and you can influence things. And, of course, the doctor is making the decision, not the president of the hospital, because the doctor is the one that treats the patients. And I was applying that into China. So on the flight back, we had a meeting that night, and we set up the Chinese president's Chinese President Administrator's Development Program in Honolulu. And with the University of Hawaii, we set up a 2-week training program for how to help hospital presidents understand how to administer a hospital better. And I'd go with them. So I'd go for 2 weeks with all these hospital presidents, 50 a time, and we would learn. And all of a sudden, sales started taking off. It was an amazing thing. But literally, 9 months, it's my fault. 9 months, because I didn't listen. And I applied, we all come with our own lens to things. And I didn't see it when they were telling it to me. And instead of thinking, God, these guys don't get it, what I should have said is, what am I not getting that they're trying to tell me? And I didn't do that. And I wasted 9 months of our time before we could get that growth going. Now, the ultimate result of that, what's interesting is, as I was getting ready to leave, we're talking about the succession plan, is we decided to do something very different. When I left as the general manager, we decided to set up 3 general managers by region, so that, because there's so many hospitals and China's so big that, I got sick of gumbaying and going to dinners and trying to get to know all these hospital presidents. And so ultimately what we decided to do is we'd make, we had a South China general manager, a North China general manager, and then they could have these relationships and be there much more frequently. So we went into a regional structure for a couple of years and to help us through this phase because we had no long-term relationship with these hospitals. And that really set us up to help our growth go in China. So what happened? Well, as I said, we had very low sales. By 2000, we didn't hit our $100 million goal, but we were at $48 million, and we'd moved from 77 to 7th on the list of pharmaceutical companies, foreign pharmaceutical companies in China. And today we sell, around $225 million, and China is a critical part of our strategy. So it's kind of cool when you look back on it, because in 1995 we sold $2 million. It's amazing. One of the lessons here is how much energy it takes to generate those first sales. And then once you get it going and you get that critical mass and you get repeat purchases, you can really move to that next level. But without a doubt, the greatest experience of my life was doing this, and it's fun to look back on and watch it grow as an affiliate. Okay, the other side of this lesson we want to talk about is Cialis. Now, many of you first years, right, and you've just finished the Cialis case. Okay, so you know this better than I do now, right? Because you've just done it. It's been a while. For those of you that haven't read this in a while, here's kind of the top situation. I was in China, actually, when we bought the rights to Cialis with IQOS. And they called me and asked me if I'd be willing to come back and do this. And I was happy to do that because it was the kind of thing I'd like to do. It was new, innovative. We don't know how to do it. So it was this entrepreneurial spin on things, and that made me very excited about it. But the situation was, Viagra was the best-known brand in the world at this time. Remember, this is when all those all the jokes, and it was everywhere. And whether you were in Ulaanbaatar, China, or in Indianapolis, Indiana, there wasn't a person in the world that didn't know what Viagra was. Pfizer's 4 times bigger than us. Pfizer has a consumer arm. Lilly, the year before here, had a grand total sales of consumer marketing spend of, I think, $27 million. So we didn't know diddly about what to do this. They had a 3 to 4 year head start. So basically, it's kind of like saying, hey, I'm going to bring out a new soft drink and compete with Coke, right? And on top of that, then this Levitra thing was popping up there. When we started, we didn't know anything about it, and they got there very quickly. And it was going to launch about the same time. And Bayer had partnered with GSK, which also had a big consumer arm. And so we looked at it and said, boy, this is going to be a challenge. Now, this was IQOS's product that Lilly bought into. And the reason IQOS picked Lilly was because of our willingness to treat them like a partner. Many of the big pharmaceutical companies just wanted to acquire the asset. But when they worked with Lilly, they really felt like we could build an integrated team and could build a relationship that they could keep their voice. So they didn't pick us because of certainly we had no experience in ED. Urology we'd never called on as a company, so we had no relationship with the top opinion leaders. But they felt like, from their point of view, they would have greater influence and say because of Lilly's partnering methods and philosophy to all this. Little known fact, Cialis is actually GSK's product. When Glaxo bought Wellcome, this is back in the mergers days, they looked at their whole portfolio and said, we got too many things here. We're going to rationalize in certain disease areas. And they sold Cialis to IQOS. So it's a funny story because if you look at the sales today, Glaxo actually makes more money on Cialis than they do on Levitra because they get a 5% royalty on everything we sell. with no cost. So it's a funny thing because then when IQOS decided to get a partner, of course, Glaxo assumed it would be them. And IQOS, they didn't handle the relationship with IQOS very well, let me put it that way. And so the IQOS guys, they were one of the first ones off the table. But that gave, I would say that gave GSK just a wee bit of incentive to be aggressive in this marketplace because they weren't very happy about that. But this is the situation. Now, I'd love to hear your all thoughts on this, so we need to make this a little more interactive now. On Cialis, there were a series of questions that we asked. It's asked in the case, but it was also asked as a business point of view. So I'm just kind of curious what you all think. The end of the case kind of brought up this question of, should you go for it? You saw all the data. You saw it was going to be a very competitive marketplace. I played the position out there. IQOS is a little biotech. They're not, they're a biotech. So any big expenses into primary care, they don't have all the funding in the world. They're not a big pharma. Can you do that? So I'm kind of curious. What do you all think we ought to do? Any volunteers? Well, this was a really tough call because when you looked at it, there were we do when we do our forecasting, we do what we call we do the high, medium, and low forecasting, and unless we were very, very successful, we did not make money on this. And from a cash flow standpoint, it was going to take us, because of the consumer nature of this product, it was going to take us 4 years before our cash flow turned positive. Now, part of the deal was IQOS was also going to have to build infrastructure in every major European country because it was a 50-50 partnership. And so for them, they were going to be bleeding cash throughout this whole period of time. So it was not inherently obvious that you should do this. Plus, if you looked at the marketplace, you said, this marketplace at this spend actually cannot afford 3 players. So who's not going to win here? It was really one of the question marks. And how do you make sure you win? So one thought was, do we niche this thing? Do we pick a place and go for and go there? I didn't like that idea. Because I didn't think the part of the purpose of purchasing into Cialis for Eli Lilly and Company was to prove our marketing prowess. This was head-to-head against Viagra. Lilly had always been known as a company that could sell things when they were innovative. So if we had a first new innovative thing, we were great at it. But in a marketplace that was dependent on marketing and product differentiation, that's not what we were known for. And if you looked at the profitability of Pfizer, part of their PE was totally driven by the fact that they were seen as a great marketer. So we looked at this thing and said, you know what? We need to demonstrate to this marketplace that we can go head to head with the big boys. There was also a big argument this time. Remember, a lot of companies were merging. So there was a debate whether Lilly was big enough to stand alone, or do we need to merge with somebody else? Our sales force is, a quarter the size of Pfizer. So this was another reason that we thought it was really important that we step up to the plate, even if economically there might be some risk there. So the strategic intent for Cialis is beat Viagra. It's that simple. That was an interesting discussion, debate. My team developed that, and it was interesting because they brought it to me, and they said, hey, here's where we are. We want to do beat Viagra. And I told them no. I said, forget it. We're not going to do that. Not that I didn't want to do that, but I said, we're not going to do that. And they said, why? I said, because I don't believe you're in it to beat Viagra. Often what I'd seen at Lilly is we'd have a strategic intent, and then we'd have activities. And when you looked at the two of them, they did not align. Right? So you'd have this great strategic intent, but then you looked at the funding, you looked at the resources, you looked at everything else. The team was not behaving like the strategic intent. So I told them no. I said, I don't believe you guys. You don't have it in your heart. You're not going to stand up. When our president challenges you on why you need to spend that much money, are you going to stand up to him? Because if you're not, forget it. So go back and come up with another one. Well, they were really mad. About an hour and a half later, they stormed into my office and said, no, we want to do this. We're going to commit to this. I said, okay, now that I know you're really in and we're all in together, we'll go for this. But unless we're all in together, you aren't allowed to be on this team. So as team members joined us, that was the number one criteria. There are 2 criteria to be on our team. Number 1 is you had to be willing to go for it. Go beat Viagra. And number 2, you had to be able to tell me I'm full of crap. Because I have lots of ideas and most of them are bad. But so you have to be able to stand up to it. And both of those things are not culturally intuitive at Lilly. Because, this is a head-to-head battle against a big company, and it's all about marketing. It's not about science. It's not about, it's not about innovation. It's about marketing. And unless you like that battle, forget it. And so what happened at Lilly is this is kind of a self-selective process. We had an MBA from Thunderbird that was interviewing at Lilly, and she showed up, and they had this whole interview day for her, and she said, I don't want to interview with any of these people. I just want to talk to Rob Brown. So I get this call, like 10:30 in the morning. They say, hey, there's this lady I've been in meetings, this lady's been here since 8, and she doesn't want to interview with anybody except for you. And she said the only job she wants is on your team. And I said, well, that's interesting. Bring her on up. So she and I spent about an hour and a half together mapping stuff out. We hired her. She worked on our team. It was great. But we needed people that had that kind of attitude because we're going after the big guy now. And unless you've got that type of attitude, forget it. It's not going to work. This was not going to happen. So we went for it. Beat Viagra. One of the big questions was, how do you position the product? You all saw in the case. Which one would you have picked? I mean, you know what we did. You can watch a commercial and see what we did, right? All right. We picked duration, right? Well, that wasn't obvious either. If you look at the data, duration was important only about 10% of the people. What we didn't tell you in the case, and we didn't do this because the Harvard guys wanted to bring the case out within about 60 days of the launch, and we didn't think we could let Pfizer know this. When we did our conjoint analysis, the attribute of 17.5-hour half-lives for Cialis was a 15-point negative on the conjoint. So we didn't have a better product. We actually, in the doctor's eyes, were second and worse. Now, why was that? Well, that's because they saw the half-life of the product as a health risk. These are older people. If they have it in their body longer, they get a heart attack, they take a nitrate, they're going to die. And this was during a window of time where Pfizer had some issues with nitrates. And so there was some of this media out there. So our difference on duration that we chose in our customer's mind, customers defined by doctor, was actually a negative. So we said, hey, we're going to go beat Viagra, and we're going to make the differential something that they don't like. That was the marketing strategy for this thing. Okay? So it was quite a fascinating first business plan. Let me put it that way. But the other side of this duration thing was this, that if we chose not to make that 17.5-hour half-life matter, my competitors would make it matter on the negative. Because when a doctor saw the data without the marketing influence, their bias was it was a bad thing. So it'd be very easy for them to go out and say, hey, doc, this thing's in the body a long time. Do you really want that? It's not like these old guys have sex that often. So, they could spin this thing in a way that would cause it to be, that we viewed to block it. So we were almost blocked into a corner where we said, boy, if we don't make this relevant and of value, we're going to lose. So, 17.5-hour half-life. Today when you hear it talked about in terms of choose the moments that's right for you and your partner. Between 17.5-hour half-life and that, it took 7 iterations of that message. Just that one point. Because we had to figure out how to communicate it in a way that brought the benefit out of it rather than the negative. Now, this is a big change for Lilly. Lilly, historically, is a very scientific company. So for Lilly, it's a 17.5-hour half-life, because that's what it is scientifically. Part of the development we as an organization were going through was starting to understand that even in pharmaceuticals, a brand is both rational and emotional. And that emotional side of branding in pharmaceuticals at this point was not very well developed. And we actually saw that as a substantial competitive advantage for us. You see that in Lilly advertising today. The Cymbalta commercials you see on depression. Depression hurts. Okay, that has nothing to do with efficacy, right? It's all about the emotional aspect of the brand. So we've been able to evolve this corporately into a much stronger place for us, but this was the first place. How do I take this 17.5-hour half-life and turn it into a message that brings the emotional benefit out of it to patients? But it took 7 iterations. The first time we did it, we called it 36 hours. I was in France. We present this thing. Hey, Cialis, it works for 36 hours. This French guy raises his hand. He goes, I love sex as much as anybody, but I have to go to work. How can I have a 36-hour erection? Man, okay, we got to go back. So we come back. We got to start over again. And the point is that there's an art to this, okay? And if you don't take the time in our trade for the art, you can make a mistake. And sometimes we as an organization, because we get a scientific hat on, we don't take that time. And that's really one of the great lessons that Cialis led us to, was that by doing that, you can really get that message right and to get it to really resonating. So that's where the positioning came from and why duration became so important. In the case, you saw a chart that said obviously I thought Viagra was icon, but in the case there was this chart showing patients' willingness to try Cialis. Do you remember that chart? Did that surprise any of you? I mean, here's this icon. It has 100% market share. It's considered this great breakthrough. Why would 90% of the people taking it be willing to try something different? All the doctors said, it's very functional, it works, Well, what we learned was that Pfizer had made two significant mistakes that we were going to take advantage of. One of them, I'm not sure they could have done anything about. The other one, they could. They had the first one is with all the media that was around Viagra, it had become a joke. And when we did some collages to see the people's emotional relationship with the brand, and when you saw the collage pictures of Viagra, it was not about intimacy. It was about raw sex. I mean, they would cut out orgy scenes. They would talk about these phallic penises. A big picture of Tom Jones sitting there dancing. There was absolutely nothing in there about warmth and relationship and sex. And so what we began to realize is Viagra had become an away-from brand. People wanted to move away from it. They wanted something different than it. And it didn't really matter what it was. So there was an opportunity that I could capture a certain group of Viagra patients solely because I'm not Viagra. Okay? That's an opportunity. Now, to capture that opportunity, you've got to be second. If you're third, those people would have already gone Levitra. Right? So this timing with Levitra created a real worry to us because of that. The second thing is Pfizer made a mistake often that I think is made of companies that are leaders. Pfizer views themselves as the greatest pharmaceutical company, certainly the biggest one, and they considered themselves the best marketers. And at this time, I would suggest they probably were, as an organization. But they made Viagra the hero. Every Viagra ad you saw, what color's Viagra? What color's Cialis? See, because what they did with Viagra is they made the pill the hero. They put it on the top of the race car, right? Every ad you saw, the little pill, and it was always tilted like it had an erection on it. But what they did was, so they made the pill the hero. And what that did was it made the spouse not the hero. So you would hear women who we interview say things like, I feel like there's 3 of us in bed. Okay? I feel like, it's the drug, not me, helping my husband with this. Okay? So because of how proud they were of this brand, they created this icon, and a lot of people didn't like that icon. So we decided, part of our brand book for Cialis is you will never see this pill. Because we want the couples to be the hero. We'll help them, but it's about them. It's not about us. And so we saw that as a huge opportunity if we could capture that space, because it would come back to this intimacy. So Pfizer gave us that opportunity, and it became very important for us as we went through here. Now, how do we get a company to get comfortable with ED? This was a really interesting challenge. Because erectile dysfunction, today we talk about this, and you can talk about it, but at that time, it was like every time you brought it up, you heard this, you said something, and there was always a second meaning to it, right? And so it was like, God, how do we even have conversations about this? So in our own team, we had trouble talking about this condition. Finally, a lady who worked for me, she was from the Netherlands, she said, guys, listen, I guarantee you I've touched more penises than you have, so get over it. And it was, it was really helpful, because it was kind of like, we had men and women on the team, and so we all kind of said, okay, let's get over this. But we had to get through that as the Cialis team. Now, how do we get this company? How do we get the president? How do we get the sales rep? Most of the sales reps in the pharmaceutical industry are female, more than half. Most of them are in their mid-20s or 30s, and they're calling on these dirty old men doctors, and they're going to go talk about erectile dysfunction? So how do you do that? Well, we instituted in our brand, there are no jokes on Cialis. There is not a joke at Eli Lilly and Company about Cialis. We've got to. We did a lot of emotional research about the devastation that erectile dysfunction can have on a couple. often what you saw in that was that the spouse usually viewed, what happens is guys get erectile dysfunction, all of a sudden he's not sleeping in bed. He falls asleep in front of the TV. He doesn't want to get intimate. Now, they haven't talked about it, of course. No one talks about it. But the spouse immediately thinks it's them. They're not attractive enough. It's something they did wrong. And so there's this spiral of a relationship that causes, well, we started telling these stories. We started telling these stories in the company. This is more than just, hey, it's Friday night, let's take the pill. There's a lot more to this about this relationship, and we need our people to understand this, because Lilly is all about, this breakthrough medicines and everything else. And there was a group of people at Lilly that was not happy we purchased this compound, because they viewed it, they didn't view it as real science. They didn't view it as real medicine. But we needed to tell this story about how it helped bring this relationship back together. It didn't heal the relationship, because usually that relationship was deteriorated over a number of years, but it could be part of the process and could start to help, and it could help people understand that the disease really did matter. That was really important for us to do, because then it validated the value of the drug to the company. And that is important inside of our culture. But I used to stand up at meetings like this, and so I'd go to all the executive meetings, and everyone say what they do, and I'd say, okay, now I want everybody to stand up. Now, on 3, we're going to yell penis. And I'd make them do it. And then, because otherwise we couldn't talk about this stuff. It's like, okay, now we're going to yell erection. Because once I get them to say it once, then you kind of break through the clutter, and then they can say the words. But otherwise, it takes forever for us to communicate. So we had to move this company. And one of our happiest moments was the day Sidney Terrell on CNBC used the word erection. Because okay, we got there now. Because I got Sidney as this very formal guy talking about erections on TV. But this is a big cultural challenge for us as an organization. And it equally challenges our willingness and capability then of going directly to the consumer. As I said, we sold $27 million the year before. This is how I almost got fired. We were launching in Europe. And our goal, we set a goal of ourselves of there are 300 million Europeans, and we set our goal of having 7 exposures for every European within 20 days of launch. Now, I can't do TV commercials in Europe, so I've got to create enough PR and through other vehicles, because I want everybody to know this thing's out there, and I want so that I can capture these guys. Levitra's 30 days behind me in Europe. So if these folks that are going to move, and I want them to know about me. So how do I create this? Well, we did a couple things. First off, we signed a deal with the America's Cup. The America's Cup was in New Zealand that year. And besides the United States, New Zealand's the only market in the world that you can do direct-to-consumer advertising. So we purchased space in America's Cup, so it was on TV broadcast through Europe. Because it was in New Zealand, broadcast into Europe. Okay? That's how I almost got fired. Sydney we were signing this deal with America's Cup, and my boss's boss had said, you need to make sure Sydney knows about this. I interpreted that to mean I needed to inform him. He meant it to mean I needed to get his approval. So the announcement comes out in the media, and I get a phone call. I'm in Europe the night before our launch. Actually, it's a Friday. We were launching on Monday. And I get this message from the head of our development group saying, hey, you need to send a white paper to Sydney on why we are running TV advertising for this product. Because in the U.S., we have a policy that we won't advertise a drug directly to consumers until 6 months after we launch. Because we want the doctors to get to know about the product before we start getting consumers to walk in and ask for it. I didn't know that. So that night, I land in this. I'm in this hotel for the weekend, trying to get ready by myself, sitting in London, saying, "Oh my God, I'm really in trouble." Sunday night, I had dinner with our head of Europe, and he and I were doing media the next morning. I was on BBC, he was going on CNBC. We had this huge media campaign to get these hits. And I said to him, "Hey, listen, I need to let you know what happened. And here's what happened." And he said to me, he said, "Well, should we cancel all of our media?" And I said, "No, this is the right thing to do for the brand. Now, I've made a mistake in my communication, but let's not harm the brand because I screwed up. Let's do the right thing." And so we agreed. He went home that night, and he actually wrote an email to the president of Lilly saying that he was totally supportive of the strategy. He knew about it. It was the right thing to do, and he thinks it's exactly what we should have done, which I give him a lot of credit for because he stepped in the middle of my fight and didn't need to do that. And Rich Pilnick, who's our chief marketing officer today, who I report to, functionally has a lot of my respect for doing that because oftentimes people shy away from that rather than step in the fray of it. So I wrote the white paper. Never heard anything else back on it the rest of my career. But in that moment, it was kind of like, geez, because this is a big deal at Lilly. If all of a sudden, we don't normally do consumer, and here's this guy running around setting these things up, running them into other marketplaces, et cetera. And it was, today it wouldn't be that big a deal at all because we do all kinds of deals today. We're in a very different place, though. This was our first cusp in, and because of that, there was a lot of sensitivity around it. And part of what you have to learn, and it's actually in my summary comments, in any culture, you need to know where those lines are. And if you're going to be someone who pushes, you need to also understand where the sensitivity of the barriers are. And one of my successes historically at Lilly has been understanding that balance. And this one I just missed. I just missed, and I really thought I was gone. Now, fortunately, within 30 days in Europe, we had a 30 share, and everyone forgot about it. So I think because it all worked, maybe I got by with it. But it was a little bit concerning, that's for sure, and certainly a mistake on my part for what we did. Now, last month, we got the announcement of once a day. This isn't in your case. I'm just curious what you all think about once-a-day ED therapy. You guys think since no one's talking, we'll do a thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. Good idea, bad idea, or neutral? Neutral. Any thumbs down? Why thumbs down? No, that's all right.
I don't know a lot about the product, but it just seems
Why?
a little unnecessary.
Yeah, good. That's what the doctors think. You're aligned with urologists all around the world. I got thrown out of a restaurant for suggesting this 5 years ago from a group of doctors. They thought it was the craziest idea in the world. Here's the thought behind once a day. Part of what erectile dysfunction is about is a man feeling like he did before he had it. Men who deal with erectile dysfunction, every time they take their pill, it's a reminder that they have this problem. And with one of the benefits of the 36 hours of Cialis is you separate those two things. So you take the pill, you kind of forget about it. You can take it Friday night if you want to have sex Friday night, Saturday morning. It doesn't matter. So you separate the event from the pill. What we found when we did our market research was that there's about 15% of men that would prefer to be normal. And their definition of normal is I can get an erection whenever, the moment's right. Not that I have to take a pill and do that. And I don't want to plan. And the interesting thing is the distribution of people who feel that way, it has absolutely nothing to do with the frequency of sex. They just want to feel normal. And the equation is to say, okay, I've got cholesterol, high cholesterol. I take a pill. I don't have high cholesterol anymore. Sure, I take a pill for it, but I don't have high cholesterol. Well, now I don't have ED. Sure, I take a pill for it, just like I take a pill for my cholesterol. So there's a group of men out there, 10, 15%, that see this as a way of just kind of forgetting about it and taking it every morning. Well, from our point of view, beat Viagra. If I can get 100% of 15%, and oh, by the way, those guys take 200 to 250 tablets a year versus the folks that take 20 tablets a year at a lower price, but that's an interesting opportunity for us. Now, the challenge we have is can we sell that appropriately? Can we position it the right way and help people understand what to do with it? That's going to be our challenge. It's kind of like bringing out cherry Diet Coke. And this is not something pharmaceutical companies normally deal with. Right? Now, there's risk here because Pfizer could very easily go out to the doctors and say, hey, you know what? That once-a-day Cialis is a good thing. That's where you should use Cialis. For that 10% of men that want something once a day, Cialis is perfect. For that guy who wants something as needed, Viagra is the perfect drug. So we've got to be careful they don't position us in this niche. And that's the biggest risk on this thing. I will tell you, we've launched this. We launched this in 3 countries in Europe as a pilot in September. We've gained, in Portugal, we've gained 7 share points. We're now at 63% market share. In France, we've gained 4 share points. I believe now we're at 71% market share. And in Norway, we've gained 3 market share points. So the net effect, about half of the patients have come from Cialis, half have come from the other products. So at least we've seen in these 3 markets, and we intentionally launched it in only 3 markets to give ourselves some time to see, could we position this right? And could we position it right in Portugal, which is a market that you need a prescription, but no one asks for a prescription. So could we position it right in a market like that, which is how Brazil and Mexico and some of the other marketplaces work? France, a market where we have a leadership position. So what would it do when we're in a leadership position, but where we have good execution? And then in Scandinavia, because we wanted more than one market to look at. So we've been very careful and cautious to make sure we know how to do this, because there's clearly risk. But if we're successful, it is what will allow us to beat Viagra in the United States. All right. So what's happened? Well, in 2007, sales hit $1 billion. We have now beat Viagra in 27 countries. Unfortunately, not including the U.S. That would be a good thing if we had the U.S. Why have we not been as successful in the U.S.? Well, the U.S. is one of 3 countries in the world that we did not launch second. We launched third. Levitra beat us by 90 days. So that group of people that were away from went to Levitra. So the Levitra share in the U.S. is about twice the average outside the U.S. And it's because that group went there. Secondly, the U.S., with all those millions of dollars Pfizer spent on consumer DTC, that didn't occur in other markets. So the brand equity on Viagra in the U.S. is substantially higher than it is in France and many of the other countries because it didn't have $450 million worth of repetition going on in the marketplace. So it's a harder market for us to crack. Now, I will tell you, we think we will beat Viagra if the once-a-day does what it's supposed to do. But it's going to take that one to get us there. But we have succeeded in many of the markets around the world. Okay, so kind of a summary. What works, why, how do you get ahead? And this is, I think, broader than just Lilly. To me, the most important thing is credibility. When you're trying to innovate inside a company in a variety of different ways, the number one thing is, do they believe you? Right? Do they trust you with their dollars? And if you can create that type of relationship, what I find is that the path to being allowed to innovate is much quicker because you've already got that goodwill or that brand equity in the marketplace. To me, the key to that is honesty. I am very careful to make sure when we're taking risks, people know what the risk is. I do not round up, ever. Now, I'm optimistic, and I'll tell them, hey, I think we can do this, but this is the risk. I think we should go for this. But here's, and I make sure they hear that part of it, because too often we try to sell, and we need to sell the idea, but we need to show the balance of it. And when we do that, we can create the credibility along the way. Secondly, it's really important that you're willing to dream and then implement and access on that dream. One of my greatest frustrations is when I see folks and talent that tell me what I already know, or tell me what's already going on, or tell me what we always do. And so I spend a lot of times, I'm at meetings, I'd say maybe, once a week where I'll say, time out. I said, I'm giving you permission to dream again. Because sometimes in a corporation, you get so caught up in the process and everything else that you lose that innovative aspect to it. And it's really important that we all keep that and then accept the risks associated with that, but go for it. Go for it. Challenge the status quo. We need that. That's why we hire really bright folks. Understanding the balance, and this is where I dropped the ball on the Cialis launch with the consumer stuff. Understanding that balance of risk with the company, because there's a lot of environmental things going on in our industry, and it's ever changing. You know, the risks in Washington, the political positions that we're in, etc. And not being aware or totally understanding where those things are is where I dropped that ball. Now, I was doing stuff outside the U.S., so my assumptions were, who really cares what I'm doing in New Zealand? Right? I mean, does it really matter what's going on in New Zealand for the big company? I mean, the whole investment was $700,000. I mean, is this really a big deal? You know what? It was. Because there were a whole bunch of stuff going on around consumer advertising, all those kind of things. And I wasn't aware of that. So understanding and finding that balance so that you know where the landmines are, I think is critical. And then finally, managing your career. Twice in my career, I've turned down promotions because I didn't think it was the right next place for me. One of them was within the U.S. When I was running one of the brands in the U.S., I was offered to go to China. China was not a promotion. It was a new business. So Lilly picks its levels and values based on complexity and value. Well, the China $2 million was not a value that created. Complexity was high, value was low. And they said to me, listen, you can become a director in the U.S. in the next 60 days if you stay here. I see a lot of folks jump up rather than see, what do I want to do? By this time, I'd realized that I was a starter of things, and that's what I like to do, so that's the path I took. Same thing when I was in China, getting ready to leave China, they said, we'd like you to run another country. And I said, well, are you talking about like one of the big 5 countries? And they said, well, no, we were thinking more like Turkey. Now, that would have been a promotion, because China still was not that big. But what was I going to gain from running Turkey? So again, I said, no, I'd rather not do that. I'd rather go do something that was innovative, different. I've got this marketing background. And so then I actually, proactive communication, when we did the IQOS deal, I sent a little email to the guys and said, I don't do this very often, but this is the kind of opportunity I'm interested in pursuing. And that came true. So I think over time you start to learn about yourself a little bit and what you like and where that is, and that does take some time to do. I also think, though, being true to that and not always saying, gee, my goal is to get here, can really make a big difference, because then you can start to map that out and it allows you to succeed but also enjoy that career. And ultimately, I think it pays off quicker, and it pays off broader, but it's not always so obvious, and that's part of the key here. So anyway, those are my comments. I'd love to open it up for questions and see what else I can tell you about Cialis, China, Lilly, whatever you'd like.
One of the other key pillars of your career in addition to Cialis and China that you mentioned is direct-to-consumer marketing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about your experiences being in the early stages of an entirely new way of marketing drugs to consumers, and what some of the challenges or opportunities were at the outset.
Yeah, the number one challenge for us is was how do we value, how do we create good ads, because we have this mentality of a pharmaceutical approach, and that approach is not nearly robust enough. So one of our biggest challenges is how do we come up with a standardized way of doing that, and then how do we attract talent that can help us jumpstart that. So as an organization, we said we got to hire this rather than learn it, and what we need to do is hire it, then teach it wider and broader. But at that time, why would a top consumer person come join Eli Lilly and Company? It didn't feel like the greatest career move for somebody. So that was one of our challenges, getting that top talent in first. Secondly, how do we convince the organization that's a good investment? Because these are not cheap, right? What I would tell you is the Cialis result helped us get through that. But there was a large part of the corporation that said, yeah, but that's sex. That's not really health care. That's more over the counter. It just so happens it needs a prescription. So Cialis opened the door, but there was a large group of the organization that didn't believe it was transferable to the other products. When Cymbalta, a year and a half ago, went to a DTC approach, sales just exploded. Now, depression for Lilly's core. So Cialis opened the door, but it was the second brand, Cymbalta, that's blown the door open. We have a consumer person on 8 brands right now, and of those 8 brands, only 2 of them are on TV. Because what we've started to do is say it's not just about a TV ad. This is not a DTC strategy. It's an understanding consumer insight strategy that translates back to every single thing you do. See, that's where Cialis taught us was, historically, we've done all of our segmentation to the doctor and through the eyes of the doctor. Cialis, we said, that's goofy. We're going to do it through the eyes of the consumer, and then we'll communicate to the doctor in a way that resonates with him what the consumer desires. So we've changed how we think about that entirely. And then once we get that consumer insight, we'll dial back everything we do to meet that need, and then we'll do that in a way that works for the doctor. That's a huge paradigm change for us. But that's been the key. Now, to do that, it's taken time and iteration, but the Cialis kind of opened the door for that, I would say. And we I will tell you, we made progress, and then it dropped off for a while, and right now we're on a big roll. And every single team now thinks this way, has someone do that. Because you think about it, we touch the consumer in so many ways. We have an ad, but patient education materials is a very simple, the sample. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff on the internet, et cetera, but there's like 9 or 10 different tools we actually utilize with consumers, even if we're not doing mass media. And we need to be thinking that way in all of our brands. So it's multiple levels. Yeah. Yeah, one more question, sure.
You talked about achieving a 30 share in Europe in 30 days.
Yeah.
What were the driving forces aside from the consumers who were moving away from Viagra? And were you able to replicate that market acceptance in other countries?
Yeah, we've replicated it everywhere but the U.S. Australia, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, basically everywhere but the U.S. The couple keys. One is we got the opinion leaders on board. Two is we created enough awareness that you got the away from, but you also picked up existing Viagra users. If you look at the case, what we viewed, the way we started to look at this was that the person that understood the benefit of Cialis best was someone who was taking or had taken Viagra. And we equated it to a computer. If you don't have a computer, so you're someone who's not in the market, all you do is you want a computer. But once you have a computer, then you start saying, well, what's my modem speed? What's my, you start asking for all these other things. So the guys that were actually taking Viagra and seeing the limitations of its window saw the benefit of Cialis best. So what we needed to do is make sure that they saw that and basically wanted to come in for an upgrade. And that was our strategy, is how do we get that communicated? So we started that through the PR, and then we did the America's Cup. All it was the name, because it was just a reminder ad on sales and on buoys and everywhere else. But we wanted to make sure it was out there and it was a big deal. But the first step, what we did was we had to figure out how to position that 36-hour thing in a way through PR. And so the idea we came up with was actually from France, and we coined the term La Weekend. And so the first media we brought out was to come up with this idea, hey, this drug would allow you to take it on Friday night and works all weekend. In fact, the French are calling it Le Weekend. And in doing that, then that became the tag that all the PR picked up. And every article, this is all pre-launch, every article that showed up, you saw the name Le Weekend. Now, the other thing we did, because we've got this Viagra, this huge brand awareness, and you couldn't do this today in the pharmaceutical industry, but we did at that time. You have a generic name and a brand name, okay? The generic name is typically what shows up because it's more scientific, and that's what all the scientists use and all the doctors use. ICOS, because of the little company, they hadn't gotten around to getting a generic name as early as we at Lilly would have. So what I did was they came up with a generic name. You have to agree with this company, this WTO agency called USAN, so that the name's separate and unique and fits the categories from a scientific standpoint. I kept rejecting their name. So for all the time up to launch, with a month before launch, there was no generic name, so everybody had to use Cialis. Because what I wanted to do is I wanted every single article to say Cialis, given the challenge of trying to get Viagra. So we actually have a publication in a medical journal that it's only called Cialis. It has no generic name tied to it. And then all the PR had to do the same thing, because there was nothing else to call it. So we tried to find some ways to create as much awareness and position as we possibly could in this window of time to try to fight this mega brand. And that's how we did it. So we had a whole bunch. I was stunned how many people came in to switch that were satisfied with Viagra but wanted to upgrade. And it was all around creating this concept of this benefit of this window and Le Weekend, because, of course, we all know the French are, Anyway, thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed the talk.